talk about something that's very important to my family, something that's very important to a lot of families, and you underlined it yesterday. My son's been a type 1 diabetic. One of my sons has been a type 1 diabetic since he was 11 years old. The price for insulin has skyrocketed. Let me say, for no reason at all. No market-driven reason other than massive profits. I can afford to pay that. I can afford to carry that. But so many people who know that I have a son with type 1 diabetes come up to me, and they just feel despair. They're like, we're having to use old insulin. We're not able to pay some bills. We're in financial straits because our budget is so high for insulin. Let me just say it. It's a crime. And I just want to know, what's Joe Biden going to do? What are you going to do? What is Congress going to do to stop this theft from families who are already suffering with diabetes?
Well, my priority, and certainly since I was first elected, has been to work on lowering the cost of prescription drugs. And in the House, we've passed numerous pieces of legislation. I've had bills focused on transparency with pharmacy benefit managers, because so much of what happens with drug pricing happens sort of behind some curtain. I've worked on legislation related to the 340B program to ensure that federally qualified health clinics and hospitals that serve underinsured and uninsured can get prescription drugs necessary to treat their patients. But the specifics of what you're talking about, diabetics who require insulin is across the board. No matter where I am, what I'm doing, people will pull me aside and talk about this. Anecdotally, a couple months ago, I was at a parade for a campaign event. I went to go say hello to the folks in the Republican floats, introducing myself, saying hello. And one of the gentlemen followed me away to say, participating in the Republican float, followed me away to say, please keep doing what you're doing to lower prescription drug costs. My child is diabetic. And so what we are working on, what I'm working on, one, I'll continue to push on H.R. 3. We don't see a path in the Senate for that. That's the bill that would allow Medicare to negotiate its prescription drug costs and then apply and convey those cost savings based on competition to private insurers. And then the elements of lowering costs for prescription drugs that we passed as part of the larger Build Back Better framework. I am urging my colleagues to let's work on that. Certainly, there's been a lot of consternation about what could or could not get passed in the Senate. But the one thing that so far we haven't seen much debate over is whether or not we could pass what passed out of the House, what was pre-negotiated with the Senate, which would not only allow Medicare to negotiate many of the most expensive prescription drugs, would also put a cap on Medicare prescription drug copays for seniors, and put a cap on the copay that Americans across the country pay for their insulin.
So why in the world? Why in the world has this not been passed already through both chambers? Why hasn't the president been able to sign it? Why hasn't that gotten into law? I can't believe anybody in any party would be for pharmaceutical companies price gouging diabetics and their families. What is the delay?
Well, so I take the any of the possible routes forward on this issue approach. And what that means is that if we can do this as a standalone piece of legislation, let's do it as a standalone piece of legislation. If we partner it with something else to move it forward and garner the votes, let's do that. I think what we saw with the framework for the Build Back Better Act that we passed out of the House, it just didn't have the votes in the Senate. And because it didn't have the votes on the Senate for the other elements in that package, these incredibly important life-saving elements focused on lowering the cost of prescription drugs are also on the table. I say let's pull off from the table what we can all agree on, pass that, move forward, change people's lives, and ensure that not a single constituent, like the ones who came with me to meet the president and were able to tell their stories directly to the president. So there's no family that is deciding whether or not to put food on the table. There's no family structuring the purchase of their insulin. There's no families sort of cutting their dosage, using pumps long after they're supposed to, or using expired insulin, which are the stories that my constituents have been telling me the entirety of my time in Congress, and certainly had the opportunity to tell the president yesterday.
Hard to see who could be against that. Good morning, Congresswoman. Different topic for you, and that is members of Congress trading individual stocks. You introduced legislation almost 2 years ago now, after you saw some of what was happening around the coronavirus pandemic, the reports of members of Congress profiting off of that. It's got some new momentum, and it's kind of happening at a breakneck speed. You've got people from both sides of the aisle coming around to your position about this ban. Do you think it's going to make it through? There is still some opposition out there from members of Congress. Do you think there will be a ban on members of Congress trading individual stocks?
We're working on it. We're certainly doing the work to make it happen. We have just seen tremendous forward momentum with the bill that we introduced. It's bipartisan, day by day. More members, Democrats and Republicans, join on to the piece of legislation that we have in the House. We're working with our partners in the Senate, Senators Ossoff and Senator Kelly. And Chip Roy is a Republican from Texas, and I have been sort of fanning about, talking to people about our legislation, why it's the bill we believe should move forward. And day by day, it's really picking up momentum. So there's no final date in sight for a vote. But we're doing the work to continue building the coalition. And frankly, the American people are helping us in that. People have been responding just so positively to the bill. It makes perfect sense to people. I can't believe that this wasn't already a thing, is what we're hearing. And so individuals across the country have been reaching out to our office and their members of Congress's offices. And so we're getting a lot of people who are contacting us because they've actually been hearing about it from constituents. So to any of your listeners who might have contacted their member of Congress, thank you for that push for them to pay attention and dig into this bill.